Do a bit of a ghetto build for you now. I've got a V222. I've hacked apart. Put a tiny little video transmitter with a cloverleaf antenna on it. It claims to be a 200 milliwatt transmitter. 120-degree field of view FPV cam. Let's try and give you a scale. That is my finger end. That's the camera. And a tiny 3.3 volt regulator. Now I'll put some heat sinks onto the video transmitter because it does overheat, and I've regulated power to it because although it's advertised as 5 volts max, it actually is only 3.3 volts max. It gets red hot. In order to seal the heatsink on, I've used JB Weld, which is what you use for fixing exhausts. So if it gets hot, it don't matter. So basically, it's got its own little teeny tiny battery dedicated to the camera. Although I have actually this mess of wires at the back, which I tidied up, means I can power it straight from the main flight pack, but you will get lines on that if there's no low pass filter. So I've got two options. I can either power the camera off and the video transmitter off that. If that runs out, I can have a flight but with wavy lines off the main flight pack. So like I said, it's a bit of a ghetto build, but the little flight pack sits there, power lines going in. I'll show you a wiring diagram. Basically taking power from that little battery, cutting it down to 3.3 volts, because don't forget a lipo 1 cell starts at 4.2, goes all the way down to 3, but you don't really want to go lower than 3.3, so this is step up, step down Pololu, step up, step down regulator. Ensures a steady 3.3 volts to the video transmitter. So it goes out to this cloverleaf. Video signal comes in from the camera to the transmitter, and then the camera itself is powered straight off the 1S lipo, which is why you get lines when it's powered off the main flight pack and not its own battery, because you get voltage sag basically when you power the motors up. So that's why we have the spare battery, or the dedicated battery, clean as a whistle in terms of flight. To be honest, I knocked this up last night. I went to bed about 6 in the morning, which was stupid. Got into one about it. It flies great. The only thing I'd say is it's a bit overweight. It hovers about 70%, but if you cut the power, it does not have enough to suddenly come back up. It takes a little while to keep going. I haven't tested it out fully, but I reckon about 6 minutes flight time. I'm going to skinny it down. The other thing is, and I say this is a bit messy at the moment, but I designed the whole thing so it can come off and the quad can be flown on its own and put the other stuff back on. And how I did that was I cut off the top, just cut through the 4 connectors with scissors that hold the old camera on, super glued it to a bit of old credit card that I cut up, and zip tied and hot glued the camera on, velcroed the video transmitter on, velcroed the regulator on. I've obviously reinforced the antenna connections with 2-part epoxy, and I've made sure that there's no stress direct onto that point by fixing the antenna there. So that's the transmitter. As you can see, it's cheap as beans on eBay. That's a voltage regulator, step up, step down regulator, $6 a pop. Again, pretty cheap. You're not going to make money. If you want to buy something, you'll buy it a lot cheaper, but if you want to learn how it all works, and you won't lose a lot. Okay, so that's how to wire up the transmitter. 1S lipo. This can take 3.3 to 5 volts allegedly, but it can't. Otherwise it overheat and blow. So instead of all this guff here, I put the Pololu regulator in on these positive and negative, so it comes in from the battery, common and ground and power, and then the voltage out goes to that, and then common back. So this is only getting 3.3 volts. I've also put the heat fins on it, or the heat sinks on it. I don't bother with sound, video. The other thing I did, because these are tiny little solder pads, what I'd done was I soldered some of these pins that way onto the board. Across they fit perfect. Snipped off the ones I weren't using, and then used 2-part epoxy to seal them on nice and tight. 2-part epoxy because it's non-conductive and it will wear that kind of heat, especially with the fins and whatever you sinks on it. It shouldn't get that hot, so that makes it a lot easier than keep trying to wire solder onto these tiny little pads. But if you don't have a step up, step down regulator, apparently you can do all this guff with a diode and a couple of capacitors of these ratings to do the same thing. Then on the antenna, the middle one to the middle wire, then split the coax one side, the other side, and make sure you don't bridge it. And again, I epoxied it all on, epoxied it all on, and then I reinforced the antenna further up using a credit card, but you see that in a minute. Just another thing, if you're brave than I was, you can take the lid off of the RF shield off of the transmitter. I'll clip it here and here. I only realised once I'd epoxied it, which is too late, but this chip that gets hot and it's not bridged to the RF shield, so if you put thermal paste on it, you can use the RF shield as a heat sink. But I didn't figure that out, which is probably why my setup is a bit porky. Final reckoning. Quad no battery. These scales are a bit sucky. 75 grams, not bad. Flight pack. 90 grams. Hugely bloated FPV gear. 111 grams. And tiny little flight pack. 20 minutes of FPV. 116 grams. The FPV gear is adding 116 less 90.